morning, everyone. Mabuhay to our foreign delegation here. Listening to the previous presenters, I was wondering that one of the receptacles of private data is someone we cannot encrypt, we cannot redact, we cannot put a password on. That's our personal secretary or our personal assistant. So how could we redact them or subject them to an 8-bit or 12-bit, 16-bit data encryption security? So, in fact, I was reminded that one time my secretary was holding a check of mine and said, "Sir, where do I deposit this?" And I told her, "Put that into my ATM." And she was looking at me blankly and said, "Sir, is that a secret account? Because I don't have that information." And so I said, "That's automatic to Mrs. ATM." Okay, I'm supposed to speak about consent in the media industry. The broadcast industry is what is known as traditional media. Although we are now in different platforms, we also have our live Facebook. Is an anathema or opposed to the principles of data privacy. As one of the earlier presenters stated earlier, si Jay, sabi niya, the role of media is to disclose information that some interest groups would rather keep hidden, because that is the role of media as a fourth estate. So, while media may not actively search for data, it is a very active recipient of information or data that could have been sourced through data breach. So now we are confronted with the issue of whether or not to use the data in the interest of the public, which is the first gateway. While we receive information that might have been sourced through data breach, the first gate point is that we use only data that is of public interest. In fact, in the Code of Ethics of Broadcast, it makes use of the term profound public interest. No ordinary person would be subject to the use of data pertaining to that person. Usually it is public officials or private persons that have a public relation. So that is the first data point, or rather gate point. Now, what are the ethical considerations? First is the information must be subject to verification. In fact, that is fact-checking. Some networks make use of 3 independent source fact-checking, meaning to say we must check the information given to us from other sources rather than the one who gave it. It's quite difficult, but that is a practice which we try to get our members to practice. That is an ethical practice. The next is, and this is where consent. We do not necessarily seek the consent of the subject of the data, but we give them an opportunity to respond. For example, just a few days ago, there was the issue of information regarding the health of the president. Let us say that we are in receipt of information that the health of the president is such, and our source is from the hospital where the president was examined. Do we make use of the data? I can say that the answer is yes, because the health of the head of the state, the president, is of public interest. The question is, do we get his consent? We might try, but obviously in most instances, the subject will not give consent. So our ethical practice is to give them an opportunity to respond. We inform them of the nature of the information we have, and we give them the opportunity to respond to the information. So that when we broadcast the information, it comes with the response of the subject. Or at least we also give them the opportunity to go on the air. Another ethical consideration, and this was also explained a while ago, is the obligation of the journalist to keep the source confidential. This is Republic Act 53. It protects journalists in the sense that they cannot be forced to reveal the source of their information. Take note, it does not protect the provider of the data or the information. It protects the journalist if he refuses to reveal the source. Can the journalist reveal the source? The answer is yes. At the risk of losing credibility, which is the cornerstone of journalism, credibility. There are some problems attendant to Republic Act number 53, which is commonly known as the SOTO law. The problem is this Republic Act, if I'm not mistaken, is a 1939 circa Republic Act. And it specifies that the journalists protected are the editors, writers of a newspaper. Remember, at that time, there probably was no radio. Well, the first radio station is a circa 1939 radio station, DZRH, which is now 80 years old. But there was no television, there was no Facebook, there was no YouTube or privately owned platforms. So the issue is, if you give information to a journalist in television, is the journalist protected by the SOTO law? Of course, our position is yes. But if you strictly enforce the law, only journalists of newspapers are the subject of this Republic Act. That is why we have asked Senator Soto to introduce amendments to the SOTO law. I think it was his father grandfather who was sponsor of this law. So he is now, he will possibly introduce amendments to cover all types of media platforms. Which brings also an issue of whether or not practitioners, bloggers and vloggers fall under the category of journalists. Because nowadays, everybody is potentially a editor or a producer of an IP TV or an IP radio. You can just go on air through social media. And you are not necessarily subject to the same ethical standards of journalists of newspapers, radio stations, and television stations. The rules of the game in the social media platform are different from that of traditional media. In fact, one of the issues we are confronted with right now is how to discipline a journalist in the traditional platform who also practices on the social media platform. Are they subject to the same ethical standards? It's quite difficult for us. In fact, the latest decision of our Board of Trustees is we cannot discipline a journalist who practices on the IP platform because our jurisdiction is traditional media. So that, in essence, are the issues being confronted by the broadcast industry, both radio and television. Maraming salamat.